before I pass it over to Steven, for those who don't know me, I'm Alessio. I'm the founder and CEO of Forward Fooding. We established this business about 4 years ago, really with one very simple mission, as we believe that collaboration between corporates and startups can actually make a difference and solve some of our biggest challenges of the food system. And so we set the business with the vision of really bringing the best of both worlds when it comes to pushing and fostering innovation forward. The ability on the one end of startups to actually innovate and create meaningful innovation for consumers, with the ability of corporates to actually scale some of this innovation. And so through food tech data, insight, and our global network of startup companies, we really try to foster meaningful collaborations that can contribute to creating a brighter future of food. Before I pass it to you, Steven, I know you have a long bio, which I'm going to skip to allow you actually to talk about yourself and growing underground. So I know that the company, has been, we actually use it as an example in some of our workshop and reports. And we always mention, this funny fact of you setting up, the farm actually in a World War II bomb shelter beneath the streets of London as kind of to explain, also to some of our corporate customers that sometimes, really entrepreneurs, do funny things, but I guess, they actually have a meaning. So maybe we can start from there, Steven. If you can introduce for those who don't know you, briefly yourself, and actually if you can tell us a little bit about the genesis of the company as well.
Yeah.
That you co-founded. Yeah.
Thank you, Alessio. Well, the company is actually Zero Carbon Food Ltd, and our first brand was growing underground, and the concept and it was all kind of born out of research in 2012 and 2013 when me and my business partner were originally looking at this. But first of all, let me just address the name in terms of like we have vertical farming, we have urban farming. However, like many others, we refer to it as controlled environment agriculture, and the main premise is about forensically controlling the environment from the point that the seeds are sown all the way to the point that they're harvested or packed. And this is ensuring the plants receive exactly what they require in terms of nutrient, light, and the growing environment as well. And inevitably, forensically controlling the environment like that means you get an increase in the yield per square meter, and you also get a reduction in the growing days. And this kind of brings me back to the reason for going underground is, we were looking at, academics were writing about vertical farms in office blocks and in warehouses. And when you think about when you're trying to control an environment and you're trying to do that to a forensic level, actually doing that 20 meters high in a warehouse is very, very challenging and very difficult. But what somebody had done with this underground World War II air raid shelter is a World War II air raid shelter. It's 70,000 square feet. It had 8,000 people down there during the war. And so it's a huge industrial scale size. But effectively, whether it's -5 or +30 outside or upstairs, it's a constant 14, maybe 15 degrees. It may fluctuate by a degree. And the humidity stays the same. The airflow is consistent and inevitably have a very efficient and effective ventilation system. When you had 8,000 people down there during the war. So when people kind of say, well, why have you built a farm underground? Well, the actual reason for doing it was the fact that it lent itself as a perfect growing environment. And controlling that environment is so much easier to do when your parameters are set at consistent humidity and a consistent temperature. So as crazy as it sounds in terms of building a farm underground, it's actually a perfect site for growing.
That is awesome. Thanks, Steven, for that. Again, this is where, I think when we explain it to some of our corporate customers, the first reaction is like, oh, why did they use, a former bomb shelter, right? But actually there is a scientific also explanation for it, which is, which, as you said, it makes a perfect environment to actually grow things in a controlled environment. So that is awesome, Steven. Thanks for that. So we've done actually a few webinars also in the past about vertical farming, and to me, one of the key benefits to the eyes of consumer is that you can actually see the product, the product provenance, right? And I know that you also have started giving also tours of your underground farm recently.
Yeah.
What is the role of transparency in your business? And if I can add on that, how do you envision actually the role of transparency to be played out in the broader industry, also as I think, you know, some of the effects of the pandemic have also highlighted the importance of transparency.
I think, well, tours was actually pre-COVID, so sadly we're not doing tours anymore, as you can imagine. But transparency, provenance, trust, all of these are kind of key in terms of that relationship between grower, producers, and consumers. If you go all the way back to 1990, we had BSE, we had the mad cow disease in the UK. We had 2013, we had the horse meat scandal. There's not always clear labeling, whether it comes to salt content or fat content. So transparency is, for us, we demonstrate it through accreditations like the BRC accreditation, through Red Tractor accreditations. But moving forward, there's a number of metrics that we will continue to publish, and whether that's start to publish, but also kind of moving forward, it will be whether around carbon usage and waste, and significantly at the moment as well, diversity, race and gender, certainly through our executive teams, our management teams, and our board, and throughout the business as well. And then ethically through we're going through the process of B Corp accreditation. In terms of ethics, I just don't think there's anything out there in terms of a standard that gives you that transparency. It gives you that transparency as much as kind of B Corp, but consumers kind of expect that transparency. We're very open, apart from physical tours. We make ourselves available, whether it's kind of engaging with consumers in many different forums. So, and also when you're bringing a new technology, you're bringing a new way of growing. People are fearful of, or can be fearful of, many times we got asked the question like, is it genetically modified? And it's like, well, we don't really have GM in the UK at all. And so it's certainly, it's certainly something that we always make sure, and we need to make sure as an industry that we maintain that transparency. And like I said, provenance as well. People want to know where their food comes from. So yeah, I think there's these days kind of or certainly you go back a very short period of time, nobody knows where their food's coming from. It's literally bagged up and it appears in the supermarkets. We've had some supermarkets who have been kind of, it's been highlighted, and they've been almost caught printing fake farms as a brand on there. I'd like to kind of bring that kind of provenance and that connection back to the actual kind of farmer. But there's certainly a lot of products these days where you turn around the back of the packaging and there's quite a lot of products out there where you can actually you see a picture of the farmer himself. So these are the kind of connections. But in the future, I see us like QR codes on the back of the pack that will take you through to a picture of Greg, our grower, who grew that crop that week. And that's where I kind of see that kind of connection evolving forward, as well as publishing metrics, like I said.
Of course. Wow, it's fascinating. And can you expand also on how then you envision actually consumers to kind of be at the forefront of this movement, pushing, I guess, for more transparency? I mean, do you see that as a consumer-led sort of trend, or do you actually envision that most food companies will actually need to adapt and kind of creating provenance as a new standard?
You certainly coming out of some focus groups, not run by ourselves, but run through our corporate investor. Provenance, trust, all like these play a significant part in people's buying choices and the consumer's reason for purchasing a product. So I think it's going to be consumer led. I think that's going to continue with that push. But I also think there is a desire to make it more transparent. People and certainly farmers and growers understand that there's a marketing opportunity with that in terms of in terms of being open and being honest and transparent about where the product's coming from, how it's grown, and what's going into it as well.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, we hear the same things actually from other vertical farming companies that we interviewed in the past. Again, is consumer led on the one end, but it's also been kind of driven by the desire of some of these companies to actually be more open and transparent about how they actually produce the food. Fantastic. And out of interest, how has the London public responded to eating grains that were actually grown under their feet? What kind of feedback and engagement do you receive from your consumers? I mean, you mentioned earlier that some of them are still trying to wrap their head around whether it's GMO or not, and how you actually can make, you know, the same greens in a former bomb shelter. But what was your the first reaction, I guess, when you first launched?
Well, there was a couple of elements to it. One, we very early on we approached a 2 Michelin star chef, Michel Roux Jr., to kind of join the business, certainly help us with product development. And the guy's got an amazing palate, helping us with flavors, the quality of the product. And I kind of expected him to say, unless it's grown under French sun in French soil, in the south of France, I'm not interested. And his reaction was kind of, well, it's the same as a glass house. It's just kind of extending the season. It's just glass is just a way of extending season using a form of technology at that stage. And we're just kind of taking that forward. And ultimately, though, it comes down to quality and it comes down to flavor. If the quality and the flavor is there, then the consumer will kind of buy it and return and buy it again. But people get on the tube. Like we like our tunnels are built in the style of a tube tunnel. It's an aerated shelter, but it's built in that style. So again, we had concerns that people on the tube, they see rats and mice and grease and dust, and obviously there was a concern that we might be kind of growing in some kind of environment like that. But obviously there was a lot of press that we do. You can see we literally put a photograph of our farm on the pack to highlight kind of the cleanliness and how kind of sterile the site is as such. So yeah, it's making sure that we kind of give that customer the confidence, but we get that feedback in many different ways, inevitably through our social media comms. You get that instant feedback from consumers, which is I touch wood, but majoritively like amazing feedback. And whether it's food bloggers using our products in different ways, consumers these days are very quick to come and tell you. And I expect it as well. I expect people to, if there's a problem with our product in any way, shape, or form, I expect people to kind of, if they're parting with their hard-earned cash to buy our product, I want to make sure they've got an amazing product that does what it says it's going to do in terms of the shelf life and how long it's going to last, and the expectation it's going to last in their fridge. It's going to maintain the flavor. It's going to maintain that quality. And if it doesn't, we want to know about it. And then online retailers like Ocado, again, you've got the review system on there. We consistently achieve kind of 4 or 5 stars on there. And again, that gives you that instant feedback as well. So these are great feedback loops for us in terms of our product grows in about 10 to 15 days, probably about 10 days by the time we've grown it, packed it, or gone through germination, we've packed the product, it's out, it's consumed within the kind of shelf life of the product. We're going to get that feedback very rapidly. And should that highlight any issues within kind of our growing processes or QA QC checks, then again, we can address those. But we get, like I said, instantaneous feedback, and majoritively it's positive.
That's awesome. That's awesome, Steven. And out of interest, building on what you were just talking about, how important was for you at the beginning to actually build a sort of a test and learn loop to ensure that you could funnel, this feedback in and actually improve the product substantially and deliver actually, I guess, another generation of product to the same consumers to then see actually if it was improved, at least at their perception?
Well, we took the approach of supplying food service first. So we were taking our product, we built some relationships. So 2012 to 2014 was business planning. Richard, my business partner, was looking at the technologies, LED kind of LEDs, building management systems, hydroponics, aeroponics, all of the kind of growing and tech side of it, sensors, data capture, data management and analysis. And I was looking at the market and whether that's how fresh produce was developing, how like, people eating in a different way, aging populations, like all of that good stuff. The first bit was also establishing relationships through New Covent Garden Market and through food service. So we started supply in 2015 down to New Covent Garden Market. Those guys down there, probably 20 to 30 food service distributors, and they distribute to thousands of restaurants and event caterers and contract caterers across London every single day. If the product's not good enough, they can't sell it to their clients, to their chefs. Therefore, the feedback loop in terms of what we're supplying down there is pretty much instantaneous. It's at the point of delivery. It's kind of, it's either good enough or it's not. It's out of spec or it's in spec. Maybe after a couple of days, it might have been the shelf life didn't hold up. It wasn't good enough. That allowed us to refine our product, refine our practices that was over, so 15 to Jan 17. So over a 2-year period, or it was actually about 18 month, 16-month period, we could refine that product whilst in the background working on our BRC accreditations, working on Filter Fork from Marks and Spencer's, Red Tractor, gaining the retail accreditations that were required to supply retail. And then we knew when we launched into retail in January 17, that we had an absolute solid product where we were supplying the best product that we possibly could to the retail market. So we did some great learnings in that stage.
That's great. And I guess it was pivotal from the very beginning to put that in place, because otherwise you couldn't really figure out what were the bits that needed to be tweaked, right? In the first place. That's fantastic.
And just to kind of, the retailers wanted to see that. They wanted to see that it had been supplied through restaurants and they don't want to put a product on their shelves or in their warehouses that isn't going to sell effectively. Yeah. So they want to make sure that there is a market for it. And since then, since so that was Jan 17, we've literally delivered a product every single day for the last nearly 4 years. And it's one of the things that we're kind of really proud of is that consistency of supply, that consistency of quality, and that consistency in flavor that leads to people kind of coming back and buying the products again. And again, that growth in revenue is also part of that feedback that you're kind of doing things right in terms of your customers.
Of course, yeah. And I guess again, for retailers, consistency is key, isn't it? Because they need to have...
And the consistency in the supply chain. You can't have having an empty shelf on within a retailer, but as we've seen recently, really doesn't go down that well. But effectively, they've got X amount of space within a store, and they want to make sure that every square foot or every square meter of that supermarket is generating revenue. So an empty space that says growing underground salad would not go down very well at all. Okay. So and again, so to like for us as a small business, to have that consistency of supply, but also keeping that consistent quality, we're probably one of the only companies globally that have actually done that.
Yeah. That's awesome. And building on actually what you were just discussing, or we're just discussing about also the benefits, I guess, of vertical farming to the consumer's eyes in terms of provenance and transparency. I know that on the other hand, some people question how sustainable, vertical farming can be when operated at mass scale, right? So out of interest, how do you measure actually your farm's emission? And is there a set of devices, techniques that you use to actually grow your greens sustainably as you also scale, I guess, production?
Yeah. So actually we utilize renewable energy. So we buy renewable energy from a renewable energy supplier. And we're going through the process now of carbon accounting. So literally from all the way from building the farm to every single product that we've ever supplied, and going forward as we supply, offsetting to achieve carbon neutrality all the way back to the inception of the company. So there's achieving carbon neutrality, the measuring that through there's a number of different companies that we're kind of discussing with the actual assessment to value the amount of carbon that you've actually used, and making sure that we use one of the most robust and kind of credible schemes that are out there. But that's how we measure the emissions, and then the other is waste as well, and closing that loop on waste. And so the next steps for us as well is moving to like slightly different substrate, and then also looking at ways that we move that waste. So at the moment it goes to a CHP energy project down in South London, but the next phase for us is it going straight into anaerobic digestion.
Okay, so you're trying to get also the circularity, I guess, of the...
Yeah, so Farm 2.0 for us, it will involve a completely closed loop product. So it will be carbon neutral, it'll be water neutral, it'll be ready to eat, it will be higher in nutrition, but at the same time, it will be part of a closed loop system as well.
Fantastic. Great. And you mentioned earlier that it took you a few years, I guess, to get to establish the right relationships, also to get in front of retailers and distributors, right? Can you expand a little bit on how do you actually collaborate with retailers and distributors? What is the process? What was the process of bringing your products to market? And how do you also serve clients operating in the hospitality sector? Because I know that, you know, there is a whole spectrum of actors out there, some that you actually serve directly, some others that you actually reach through distributors. Can you just elaborate on your process, actually establishing this relationship, and also how you then practically operate?
So in 2015, late 2015, we took an investment from a corporate partner, and they had a massive amount of retail experience. They generate about $500 million a year in revenues in sterling, and again, they kind of, whilst our focus at that stage was on food service and making sure that we were penetrating the food service market, they brought us that through collaboration with them. They kind of brought us to into the eyes of the retailers, and it allowed us to. We're now supplying. So we started off with Ocado, but then kind of Waitrose, Marks and Spencers, Farm Drop to get it to kind of the front door of Londoners, Amazon Fresh, Whole Foods, but now into kind of Tesco's as well. And so we find ourselves in the majority of kind of UK retailers. We've penetrated the market with and penetrated kind of retail with our brand and our products. So again, it's through kind of traditional relationship building, having a point of difference in terms of flavor and bringing something, as somebody said to me once, there's very little innovation in salad. So actually kind of taking a product that had these microgreens in there, with packed full of flavor at the same time as having kind of a base salad product with them as well. It allowed us to bring something new to the market. And that kind of established those relationships from there. So I think, but that's kind of allowed us to then build a broad segment of customers. So we have our food service segment, we have our retail segment, but we then supply food producers, we supply food processors, and also now we also supply and have made a move into kind of botanicals and cosmetics. So we're supplying a sustainable range of products that will be launched at the end of next year. And that will be a global launch of 100% carbon neutral, sustainable brand of products. And I'm under an NDA, so I can't say much more than that. But what we've found in this space is anybody with anything natural in their supply chain is finding it more challenging to source a consistent product, a consistent quality of product at a consistent price. And that's of their natural raw materials, whatever it may be. So again, we've gone from kind of looking at food to actually anyone with anything natural in their supply chain is looking at this technology to address some of the challenges they've got in sourcing and fluctuations in cost. So we find ourselves kind of moving into these different segments and spreading around the ability to kind of, deploy this technology into different customer segments.
Super fascinating. And I'm sure, Steven, that you've never anticipated that this is where we're going to take the business moving forward, right? I mean, at least from the very beginning. You said
the concept of me being involved in anything that may be a hair care product is beyond belief. So,
which again, I guess is it was just funny for me to hear that, you know, you spent 2 years building a business plan, which I think is fair enough, right? And first, also to raise capital, and I guess, you know, it's pretty capex intensive to build a farm, you know, form a bomb shelter, you had to have it, in place. But then adding these revenue streams, I guess, in that business plan was probably unrealistic, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But we've done things a slightly different way. And we always felt that we could never go out and sell people our technology, our operating system for running a farm and the process and procedures and saying, buy this farm and buy this technology from us, unless we proved that it worked in a marketplace, that we could actually grow a product at the right price point and sell it at the right price point. Certainly in the UK market as well, which is one of the most competitive markets in the world in terms of food. It was almost, it'd be arrogant to think that we could go out and say, buy our farm, unless we could prove that we were actually doing it ourselves. And even though we've kind of based our technology underground, future farms are going to be above ground, but just in insulated buildings. And we're just taking our learnings from that and deploying it into sites above ground. And so, yeah, it's for us, the next steps is literally just kind of taking that technology from underground, but moving it into these different customer sectors, like I said, whether it's processors, whether it's producers, whether it's pharmaceutical companies, or whether it's into traditional retail and food service.
Yep. Fantastic, Steven. And actually building on this, what was the hardest actually challenge for you to overtake when it came to actually bringing on board all these different clusters of clients? I guess, or in other words, did you develop like a specific kind of like onboarding process for each cluster, or were actually some sort of like common path between, the different onboarding processes?
To be honest, I think it's a very traditional kind of sales process, identifying people's needs and addressing those needs and having a solution for those customer needs. But it's a very similar process across each of the customer segments. Most people are facing the same challenges, whether it's pharmaceutical, whether it's fresh produce. It comes down to consistency of supply, consistency of product, and a consistency in the price. And even from the UK season from us transitioning from UK to the Spanish season, we will get a fluctuation in that price, as you can imagine. That's not borne out in the cost on the shelves within retail, but that's certainly felt amongst the growers.
Great. That's also interesting to hear, because I thought that dealing with different actually type of clients would also entail adapting, but it sounds like there is quite a bit of overlaps also in terms of needs. So
yeah,
it's really, I guess.
I think moving into the pharmaceutical and botanical market is again that's slightly different when you're looking at dressing kind of raw ingredients for pharmaceutical products. However, it's a very similar process in terms of the technology that we have, how we kind of capture the data from the growing environment, how we apply that to future cycles of growth, how we refine that, how we increase yield, how we reduce growing days whilst maintaining quality. It's kind of very similar kind of process each time.
Interesting. And I guess in this specific example, again, data is probably playing a big role, I'm assuming, in terms of like also giving back some of this data to your customers, if that also is part of your serving. Would you say that actually data is kind of becoming a sort of an additional currency that gets traded along with the goods that or services you provide to your customers?
Yeah, the data plays a key role in all of this, and it's not just the one thing. I think at some stage I heard somebody mentioning blockchain when it came to vertical farms, and I'm still baffled how blockchain plays a part. I do understand in terms of end-to-end transparency, but I think it's usually to add a zero to a valuation somewhere. But no, for me, data plays that key part. We saw sensor technology, the cost of sensor technology reducing. We saw the cost of storing data and analyzing data reducing. You look at AI and ML, that really does kind of play a role in taking all of the different variables, and we put a lot of qualitative variables within that as well. So it might be your humidity, it might be your pH levels, it might be your temperature, your CO2 levels, your air movement, air velocity, all of that. but it's also linked in with your microbiology as well, and what results you have from microbiology and water testing. That's also linked in with kind of hygiene regimes and cleaning regimes, and all of these elements play a part of developing what we would call that kind of almost that operating system. Not entirely sure that answered your question, but anyway.
Yeah, it does. I mean, again, it's I guess it's your bread and butter, right, on the one end, but then you kind of process it to provide actually insights to your customers, yeah, which is then eventually like the form of data that they would want you to provide, right?
Absolutely.
And there's a whole engine, I guess, behind it, right, that runs in the background.
And we started by working with some of the smartest kind of minds in the UK, if not the world, and that was, we worked with the Institute of Civil Engineering at Cambridge, working with those guys to understand the materials that the tunnel was made of, what affect external environment in terms of temperature, water, precipitation. When I say water, I mean rain, precipitation. What effect that may have on the external tunnel, what that effect that then has on the farm. What that's allowed us now to do is develop a model where we can literally walk into a new building, put some sensors in there over a very short period of time, understand exactly what the capex would be to furnish that building with a vertical farm or controlled environment farm, and what the OPEX would be from our knowledge of operating this, operating our farm for the last 4 years, what the OPEX costs would be built in with those two elements. So we now literally have that ability to offer that service to say, well, we can literally, if you want to go and do this and you want to build a farm and you want to use our technology, we can tell you exactly what it's going to cost, and we can tell you exactly what the returns are going to be at EBITDA level, which is exactly what people want to show, that there is a return out of doing this.
Of course, which I guess, again, at first was almost impossible for you to estimate, but now that you have data points, you can actually be very precise. Yeah. Fantastic. Let's get into the COVID, let's say, new normal question. It's a classic. Can you tell us, have your farm operations continued during the COVID-19 pandemic? And what would you say was the biggest, I guess, impact on your business? Meaning, was your business COVID proof, or you felt that you could have done things differently to actually make it COVID proof?
I would never be as kind of bold or as arrogant to say that we were COVID proof, especially with a virus that is kind of ever evolving. The one thing I would say though is I'm extremely proud of our operations team. And the way that they immediately identified how we would continue our operations, and we immediately established separate teams, so there was no crossover between the two. Anybody else that had the ability to work from home immediately worked from home, and then should anybody on one of those teams end up going down with COVID, then we were able to backfill that shift. Luckily, touch wood, so far we've been extremely lucky, and we've had some people that have been, look like they may have been symptomatic, but no one's actually kind of tested positive, and people have spent time away from the business. But we've continued supplying every single day all the way through this. We've showed a robustness in our operational model as well as the model in itself. And yeah, it's something I'm extremely, and like I said earlier, we've maintained, and for such a small business, we delivery every single day of the year for the last 4 years, which is something we're all extremely proud of.
So I guess it was effectively COVID proof in a way, meaning you haven't discontinued, operations for a single day. But of course.
Yes, but like we've seen with previous pandemics, there's the opportunity for a second wave. And so I wouldn't like to say anything now, and because I think that would come back and bite me on the arse.
Yeah. Fair enough, Steven. But again, I guess you have to be proud of the fact that in the whole pandemic, you were actually able to serve your customers absolutely throughout the time. So that's actually
extremely proud of our operational team, the way that they came together, the way that they overcome it. Obviously, we certainly like immediately initiated and highlight the cycle to work scheme that the government provided in the UK, so people didn't have to come in on public transport. We looked at what was best in terms of was getting a taxi, but actually putting somebody in close proximity within a taxi. Was it best to be on a tube or was it best to walk? Most people actually live very close to where our operations are. But then we did staff surveys to make sure that how everyone was feeling. And certainly one of my concerns through this is mental health. And making sure that we're there for the people that have been working from home, that have been isolated as well, making sure that we're there to support from that's the one thing that's missing is, and as human beings, we love to come together and we love to come together also in the workplace as well. And that's the one thing that certainly a number of people are missing within the business. So we just need to make sure that we are mindful of that and address that as we go forward.
Yeah. Fantastic, Steven. We talked also in previous webinars about genetics for plants that have actually been grown in a controlled environment, right? What would you say is the most interesting food tech trends, maybe related to vertical farming? So let's make it specific like that.
Yeah, okay. To be honest, I think crops that are being developed specific for vertical farming is a very interesting area. There's a couple of things that we're R&Ding at the moment that I'm not going to mention. I'm all for collaboration, but I'm also very much for commercial sensitivities.
Fair enough.
Yeah, but what we've done, if I just kind of give an example, we took an Innovate grant. And I won't go into too much detail at this stage, but we took it, and this was around water filtration, looking at a number of different technologies from different industries. And one of them was like, it was filtration from the swimming pool industry, and looking at how that could be utilized to actually make our water filtration more efficient. So yeah, for me, it's about co-opting and adapting and stealing from different industries and being kind of open to that. Outside of vertical farming, for me, the small robot company and what they're doing in terms of when you look at soil and the challenges that we have with soil in terms of compacted land and runoff and everything that goes with soil. You look at some studies that are out there, we have between 60 and 100 summers of soil left, and that's not that long. And so companies like the small robot company, where you can literally because they're light and they're small robots that can operate in fields, but they're so small that they can be solar powered and run by renewables, then it's a really interesting company. And then for me as well, back to the ongoing conversation around food and plastics, and for me, our product goes out in a renewable, in a recyclable plastic product, but at the same time, there's people out there working on seaweed that can be converted into plastics, or there was a French company that I came across recently turning some kind of enzymes and food waste that turns into plastic. For me, it's that when that's available, there's products out there made from seaweed at the moment that are not available at a commercial scale, but we're only a very short step away from that being available in a kind of a large mother reel where we can make plastic packaging from it, make it completely closed loop. But then at the same time, make sure that we're packing a product. Everyone, like, we get lots of people saying, well, why don't you just put it in egg cartons or something like that? It's like, because I would immediately add to the food waste issue. So it's kind of, we have to overcome this in a way that isn't just kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So, yeah.
That makes sense. Fantastic, Steven. Let me then, before I cherry pick some questions, and it's a pretty long list, maybe you can just share with everyone what would be your one piece of practical advice you would give to someone starting out their entrepreneurial journey, let's say in food tech, without making it too specific, I guess, about building another vertical farm. But in general, if you could maybe looking back at when you started a business, if you could give yourself actually one practical piece of advice, what would that be?
A piece of practical advice that I was lucky enough to actually have happen but I'm looking at this through friends who I know are not in this position, is find a co-founder. Find a co-founder, because doing it on your own, like doing it when it's the two of you, it's massively challenging as it is. But I certainly know of people running their own sustainable businesses that would always say, I wish I had a co-founder. And for me, it's the way that you kind of bounce ideas off each other. I've always kind of said any successful business is the company that makes less mistakes than their competitors. And for me, I believe that you make less mistakes if you've got a co-founder next to you, and that you bounce these things off each other. So yeah, it's get a co-founder. And then the other one with food tech and ag tech at the moment is get involved. Like, if you've got an idea, get involved, because it's a really embryonic industry. Like even vertical farming, there's years of growth and consolidation and scale and like all of this over the next kind of 10, 15, 20 years. And we'll see lots of change and lots of movement over the next 5. But there's so many elements to this industry that, and there's lots. It's not that agriculture is kind of super unoptimized, and it's one of those industries that really lends itself to a young breed of people coming in with a lot of fresh ideas and putting it through a different optic and a different lens. And so yeah, that's all I would say around kind of food tech and ag tech at this moment in time. And in terms of that entrepreneurial journey, find yourself a co-founder. And my one last pet gripe is never ever pay for an accelerator program, ever. Because if an accelerator program is any good whatsoever, they will not get the startup, who are the people that need the money, to pay for it. If they're any good, their investors will pay for it. So never, ever pay for an accelerator program. I actually think it's immoral.
It's immoral. I love that. I cannot agree more than with you on that. But I'm with you. I think there are I have the feeling that a lot of the companies that then end up on accelerators, with some exceptions, are actually the ones who are not just good enough to do it on their own, right? Yeah. So I get that, the kind of exchange of like equity, for getting a program, but paying for a program, I just don't see it as a viable also business model for the accelerators, to be honest, given.
And even the equity exchange is kind of, you give a percentage of equity, and that accelerator program may see a liquidity event at, say, 10 years down the line.
If ever.
It's not a viable model for them to even take equity and generate revenue. So for me, it's kind of, I attended an accelerator program. It was through the Unreasonable Group. It was funded by Barclays, who were their co-partners in that program. And I've got a massive amount of value from it. But I've been approached by so many people in terms of paying to attend an accelerator program. It's kind of, if you were actually good at what you were doing, you would either bring a client on board to fund the accelerator, or you'd be so good that investors would fund that accelerator with you because you're so good at finding startups. So yeah, it's my pet gripe at the moment. So yeah.
Okay, fantastic, Steven. Thanks everyone for tuning in today. And thank you, Steven, actually, for joining us for such a fantastic interview and sharing actually the story behind your company, and also some great pieces of advice to fellow entrepreneurs. We wish you and the growing underground and the Zero Carbon Food company the best over the coming months, and hopefully, also with the pandemic coming to an end, everything is going to restart as a new normal. Thanks again, Steven, for your time. This was brilliant.
Darren's got my peas by the looks of things. That looks like pea shoots.
Yeah.
Take care, guys. Thank you.
Take care, Steven. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.